Wonderful, sir. Looking forward to it.
Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. This is a conversation that I've been very much looking forward to. His name is Dr. Drew Ramsey. Now, for those of you that somehow don't know who he is, he's a psychiatrist, he's an author, he's a farmer, he's the author of this book, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, Nourish Your Way to Better Mental Health in 6 Weeks, which I think is a brilliant book. It's a needed book. And he was also written about in my friend Johan Hari's book, Stolen Focus, which you can go and get too. But also Dr. Drew's work focuses on clinical excellence, nutritional interventions, and creative media. He is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University of Physicians and Surgeons, and an active telemedical, which I believe he's doing at the moment, clinical practice based in New York City. He's in Wyoming, I believe, right now. Is that right, Dr. Drew?
Yep. I'm more Wyoming based mostly these days.
Amazing. Well, my friend, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
Thanks so much, Jay. It's great to be here, and everybody listening. Nice to be with you for a little bit, talk about mental health and nutrition and whatever else Jay wants to talk about.
I think this is going to be a very fun conversation. Hopefully, I can kind of quell all the questions that I have in today's conversation, because there are a lot of them. But my very first question for you, Dr. Drew, this is a question that I love starting off with all my guests. It is, what does success look like for you?
Oh, like a nice dinner time with my wife and kids. I like that. That's a good one for me right now. Success has meant different things for me at different points in my life. Earlier in my life, success felt like concrete achievements. Felt like doing well in school, performing well as an athlete, being a caring member of society. And then as I've gotten older, success looks, changes at different stages of our life. Success for me right now, I recently moved, is about managing my mental health during a transition and continuing to be a good doctor to my patients, no matter what's happening, a good father to my kids, no matter what's happening, good husband. So like for me, maybe it's not so, but that's success. Like if I can really, do all of those roles, be a good doctor, good dad, good husband. Yeah. Right now that's and then have a good dinner together. That's a great day. That's really great. And that happens. I don't want people to think that like, wow, that's like some mountain. That happens a fair amount, but that's, at least that's how I try and define it in my mind when I'm thinking about, all of the various other metrics that there are out there of our success these days. I'm active on social. I know how many likes I get and how many views, and I, see how many people open emails we send. So, there's all kinds of other things that can creep in there. But I think it's very important to kind of keep, for all of us, sort of eyes on the prize of what is actual success.
It's a very grounding and I guess a humble way of looking at it, like connection with your wife, your kids, and actually having a good dinner time. I mean, not many people would actually say that is success for them, because they would equate it to the busyness of life, trying to achieve that very next thing, which kind of contributes to the crazy mental health crisis that we have in our society with all this noise going on. And it's just affecting how people see the world, how they react to the world, and so much more. Is that the same? Have you noticed that as well in your experience and looking at the world too?
Yeah, right now is a very tenuous time for people's mental health. There was before the pandemic, before coronavirus and COVID and all of this, and all of what it brought, right? Not just death, but also polarization, fear, and a lot of discord, right? And disagreement about things like science and things like public health measures. So, on top of the mental health crisis that both of our countries were having, right? Big suicide epidemic, big drug crisis, big depression crisis, millions and millions of people. Then we have the pandemic. The upside being that everyone starts talking about mental health, because everyone gets anxious initially. Everyone has insomnia. Everyone begins to struggle with depression. A big part of the population begins to really struggle with grief and extended grief and unresolved grief, because unlike usually when you lose someone gets sick, right? You have a funeral, you mourn. Well, now everyone's mourning separately, and it's And then on top of that, now when we're recording, we're in the midst of a war, and many people feel potentially on the brink of a war that goes into something that looks like a World War III. In some ways, people would argue we're in that, by proxy. I mean, I don't know what it means for lots of countries to deliver lots of weapons to one country that's fighting. I mean, it's very tenuous right now. And so I think your question of, what is mental health like? That's people are in a mental health state they've never been in before for most folks, right? A weird place of compartmentalization, right? To go have a good time and have those things, have a nice dinner time. I have to ignore that we're in a historic moment and that horrible things are happening that I just saw 20 minutes ago on my phone, right? That's hard for all of us. Yeah. So I think it is a challenging time for mental health in all kinds of ways. And one of the reasons that writing about food and nutrition is, for a lot of people isn't part of that equation, hasn't been how we think about mental health conditions, and certainly not the only thing we need to do for mental health. But in terms of us all getting more proactive, right, regardless of the tenuous period in history that we're in, taxing our mental health, even before that, we all really need a better sense, and as communities need a better sense of how do we support and promote mental health, because it has not been going well. Yeah, it's like in my computer. So this interview continues to go well. Sorry, Jay.
You're all right, my friend.
All right, there we go.
He's got power going. Sorry, I don't know if you finished what you were saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was, I think your question was around kind of a mental health now, and my sense is that the good news is we're talking about it. By having our mental health stressed, we learn a lot about it. Not that we always triumph at every moment, but when you have to protect your sleep, when you have to actively work to decrease your anxiety, when you, just find yourself crying because it's like really scary right now. Those are all moments when we learn about our mental health. So, I don't want to be an optimist that it's all an opportunity, but I do think it's important for us to, in some ways, think about ourselves as like mentally stronger than we've ever been, because we've been dealing with more than we've ever dealt with.
Before we come back to mental health, I totally agree that in today's day and age, the mental health crisis has increased at enormous and somewhat alarming rates, but in the same sense that we are talking about it, but is just talking about it, is that enough? What are some
no. Talking about
other things can we do?
It's like mental health awareness, which I love. Like mental health awareness is great. It's that we're having these conversations where two men talking about mental health and feelings. We're using the words depression. Like, this is all awesome. But as one of my patients said to me, and it stuck with my head, somebody who'd lost a family member to mental health condition said, awareness doesn't do anything. Like, action does things. And so every time there's mental health awareness month coming up, and I love mental health awareness month. Let's talk about all the different stripes and flavors and aspects of our mental health. But we need to have mental health action. Like you being aware you're depressed or anxious, you're listening out there and you're aware, like that is great. Self-awareness is one of the most important tools. But until we take action, until we say, not only do I understand I am not doing well, but I've taken an action. Maybe that action is I'm just going to tell one person. I've been struggling to send an email for 6 months to a colleague. I sent it yesterday. I hemmed and I hawed, and then I was about to send it without this part. And then I just said, you've been hemming and hawing about this, and you're going to send it and you're going to worry about it. So just do it. Just take action. Let's see what the next step is. Let's see what of your anxieties and fears are true, as most people know, not all of them, not most of them for most of us. So yes, I'm a big believer. Awareness, obviously critical. Mental health action. I'd ask you, everybody listening, right? Just think about, what'd you do today? What'd you do today for your mental health?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, what did I do today? What I did the first day is I really tried to enjoy my cup of coffee, give thanks for how much I enjoyed my coffee, and really sit with it. Not for long. I interviewed a colleague, Robin Berzin, who talked about meditating every day. So I took a few deep breaths during that interview. I changed my schedule. So I went to breakfast and hung out with my kids, which I really like. And I realized I kind of like just sort of schedule it out of my schedule. But anyway, everybody listening, I hope there's something. If there wasn't anything, it's, doing things for our mental health doesn't have to be like complicated. It doesn't have to be like a deep therapy session. It's little things like that I think help us.
Where did your interest really begin in psychiatry, first and foremost, and then secondly, learning more about mental health issues or our mental health as a whole?
Psychiatry interested me for a couple of reasons. One of my favorite relatives, my aunt, was a psychotherapist. And so I was just really curious about the human mind. Always, as a family member, I've been like curious about my emotional internal state and how I thought about stuff. And I just liked the way that she thought about things. And helped introduce me to this notion. And my uncle was a psychiatrist. And so I had a little influence in the family, but I liked how they thought. And I liked this notion. I always liked biology. And I liked this notion of being able to understand some of the mechanisms of the brain, being able to understand some of these molecules, but it's still also being a place that was really going to expand. And then just personally, I don't know, I've always been a pretty emotional person. I think probably when I was younger, struggled with my mental health in ways that we maybe think of differently now. I think it really appealed to me as I got into medical school. The idea that you could be a clinician, you could be a healer, you could kind of work that craft, and the healing comes through the relationship in psychotherapy or through helping someone with a set of medications, maybe around very stigmatized conditions. I think that all really interested me. And then I think seeing patients, I was in medical school, there were a lot of, I remember working at the VA hospital. First time I saw somebody really manic, and then I came back the next day and they weren't. And I just, to see somebody's human brain in those two different states. Early in my career, I worked with a lot of patients who had psychotic disorders before kind of getting interested in more mood disorders and some of the aspects of those that, I caught a lot of the nutritional psychiatry, lifestyle psychiatry, sort of what I try and sum up in here is really data that's come out in the last 5 years and maybe 7 years in terms of new clinical trials showing how food can be used to impact. We know brain health. A lot of people think about, they eat well, it's going to protect their heart health, maybe, and maybe help them with dementia risk. But really, when you think about your functioning, the most important thing for you to do is protect and improve your mental health. That's the number one cause of disability in the world, meaning we're just not being our best selves. And so food, we increasingly understand, has a lot to do with that, not surprisingly, in terms of regulating things like inflammation. And then just this cool data coming out, Jay, that I don't know, there's never ever been studies before where you took a population with depression that was getting some treatment and gave them a Mediterranean diet. Yeah. And watch what happened. And what happens is people who start eating the Mediterranean diet, they get better. They get better than people who don't. And in terms of their mental health, 30%, 33% reached full remission in this the SMILES trial. So, or used to think about some cool new stuff like the microbiome and how we understand brain growth and neuroplasticity. I think what's happened is wellness has gone from a lot of juju, and there's still a lot of that in the wellness world, to some of those tenets that we hear, food is medicine, really having a tremendous amount of data and research behind them now. So, so in terms of my interest in kind of mental health and psychiatry, that's certainly one aspect. Some of the, I remember being really curious about dreams. What are dreams, Jay? Where do they come from? Yeah. Do they have meaning? Is it some neurological, some neuron fart that just happens and it's just stuff from that TV show? Or does it have deep meaning about the unconscious? Or is it the grand unconscious and we're touching it somehow? I got really curious about. I remember asking in a psychiatry class as a third year medical student, a psychopharmacologist about that, who told me it was brain fart for sure. He's like, "There's nothing. Those mean nothing." And then it's weird to then be a psychiatrist and you see people dream, or you have people who dream about you, or you see people dreaming more when they start to recount their dreams, or you see things where it's so apparent to you as their clinician, as their doctor and their therapist, so clear the deep meaning of a dream sometimes where it's impossible not to believe in the unconscious. And so, I don't know, all that stuff. And then I got into psychotherapy. I was a young guy, all angst-ridden about what to do with my life, as opposed to now as a middle-aged guy, angst-ridden about what to do with my life. But I got into therapy and I found it very helpful. But I also found it just, an interesting process So it's a long-winded answer. Why psychiatry?
No, kind of like there's a lot of avenues I could jump into with that answer, which I love long answers, by the way, so never be afraid of them. The dreaming aspect, I'm curious about that too. And it's kind of like some of the dreams you have of other people, you kind of don't want to admit that you had a dream about that person and what the dream was about. And the other interesting thing that I've always wondered is, why do we forget most of the dreams that we do have in the first place? Like, it feels like incredibly real, like it's happening in real life. Then you wake up and then you've forgotten everything that just happened not that long ago. And it's just like an instantaneous switch. And then other dreams, you remember everything that went on. It was so detail orientated, and you have everything in the forefront of your brain. And that's always fascinated me. And yeah, I don't know if that section of dreaming has fascinated you at all.
Dreaming fascinates me, Jay. I mean, it's not, it's an area I spend a lot of time in, where I get to talk to people about the dreams. And sort of part of my introduction when people enter into a therapy with me is that, tell them there's a few things I'm always really curious about, that if they have dreams, and they can, bring as much as they can in to talk about. I always appreciate that. I find dream work really interesting with the, idea. Not all dreams have this, but the idea, is there a message? Is there something that we can learn from the dream? Is there something the dream has to tell us? Why we remember dreams? The sleep physiologists would talk about that has to do with kind of how far you're coming out of deep sleep into that kind of close to conscious awakening, REM sleep, dream sleep. A lot of things affect dreaming. Different medications, different substances, alcohol. So, a lot of those factors, a lot of people have a couple of drinks and have fitful sleep, so they'll remember all of their dreams. Your brain is always dreaming when you're sleeping at different stages. And it's just that we, in that little moment where we kind of come up and then go back down into deep sleep in our sleep cycle, is usually when we're remembering it. That's why sometimes you're woken up in the middle of the night, you'll sort of be in the middle of a dream and remember it. Part of the reason people don't remember dreams, I think, Jay, is that we don't have a place for them in our lives. So for anybody listening, if you want to kind of get more involved with your dreams, I'd recommend starting with the dream journal, right? And just making the first thing you do as you wake up, right? Just try and sit with wherever you were. Don't jolt up, don't grab the phone, and especially if you work at this, what I find is fascinating dreaming, Jay, is the fact that my brain, without looking at a clock, wakes up before my alarm. I don't understand how that happens. I could go to bed at all kinds of different times, right? But if my alarm is set for 6, I'll wake up at 5:58. And I don't have it's not like I'm opening one eye in the middle of the night and peeking. So the brain's amazing in that way. There's all kinds of meaning. But as I was saying, if people kind of keep a little journal and begin to just write them down, write down as many details as you can and just sit with it. And a few tips about dreaming is I always ask people, listen to Freud, look for hopes and fears in the dreams, and then think about yourself as all of the different aspects of yourself, as all of the different people in the dream. People will be like, oh, that was because I watched that TV show. I was like, okay, but that's just your mind using that. That image gets used to represent something about you. At least the theory about dreams is the unconscious represents things to us hidden because we can't tolerate it in our conscious mind. And so the idea with the dream is it kind of helps us maybe mobilize some of those things we're not fully aware of about ourselves and make us more aware.
Have you looked into sleep therapy helping in terms of mental health and curing depression and anxiety?
Well, it's funny. Sleep is one of those things we don't have a lot of research on because we don't think we need it. I.e., when people get depressed, they either sleep more, they sleep less. Serotonin and other molecules involved in mood are highly involved in sleep. Melatonin is actually made from serotonin. A lot of people don't know that, but so sleep therapy or sleep hygiene is one of the cornerstones of mental health treatment. So if you come into a treatment with me, along with talking about some brain food, I'm going to go through a little what's your sleep hygiene routine? And if you say what, I'm going to say, oh, awesome. It's a great kind of area for you to think about because every little thing is going to make a big difference for you because you don't have a routine, right? You just set an intention. You're going to go to bed before 11 p.m. Your sleep hygiene just went up if you don't have a routine, or you're going to wash your face every night, brush your teeth, or whatever it is that kind of begins to signal. You're going to lower the lights in your house. It's something a lot of people don't do. It's like all the lights are up. So sleep is key, critical, and one of those things that also people, have some control over.
Yeah.
And most people, this sounds bad, Jay, but most people aren't honest with themselves about sleep. Yeah. I was one of those people, is how I know this. I'd say, I sleep like 7 to 8 hours. Like, I'm pretty good. I go to bed like 11 most nights. If you go to bed anytime after 9:30 and you're an adult, you're not getting anywhere close to 8 hours of sleep. I started tracking my sleep a year ago, and I have pretty early bedtime. To get 8 solid hours of sleep is incredibly hard in the modern world.
I know what you mean. I'm one of those people that goes to bed really, really early, but I wake up super early. And I guard my sleep at nighttime with everything I possibly can. Like, I give up things because a lot of my friends, they tend to go out and do things at night. And I'm like, why nighttime? Like, I get you work and all that sort of stuff, but why nighttime? Like, I mean, it's just.
I agree with you. Like, I was thinking this morning, I was thinking, so many people, because I have that sort of schedule too, like, go out at night. I mean, at night, I had that kind of, when I was younger in New York, that kind of lifestyle, to finish work, go have some drinks and meet up. But I've realized, like, now at this stage in life, that time, free time is like, it's with me, myself, and I at like 5 a.m. And that's really that's sort of a different, maybe a different measure of success, as you were saying earlier, of enjoying and using that time well. But yeah, protecting sleep is hard. I think it's hard, especially for younger folks who have a social life. I think it's so much fun and stimulating stuff is happening. It's hard for us all to put our phones down and kind of, value and treasure sleep. You should, though. 7 grams of waste gets excreted out of your brain, cleaned out of your brain every night. So like that takes 8 hours of sleep. So maybe you only cleaned out like 6 grams last night. The other grams like floating around, and that's why you feel like, bleh. I don't know if that's exactly how it works, but that's how I think about it. It helps motivate me, where I'm like, I should watch one more episode. It's like, I see that crap up there, like eating my brain. I'm like, I should go to bed, let my brain clean itself. So
it makes sense to me. And also, I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, like, if I don't get a good night's sleep, it affects my gut. And then it also affects what I want to eat the next day. Like, if I had a bad night's sleep, all I tend to crave is a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates. And if I have a good night's sleep, I tend to lean more towards the more satiating, more filling foods, the ones that are actually better for me. Like, I don't really have this desire to eat a lot of junk food. I mean, I tend to eat healthy most days. I'm human, so I do have my days I don't. I'll admit that. But for the most part, I'm heavily reliant on my sleep in order to how I feel in terms of what I eat. Does it make sense?
It makes sense. I have this like diagram where by my desk, there's this really nice article on like inflammation and depression. There's a diagram I'm looking at because I think it makes sense. And I also think there's a very biological explanation, which is, and maybe this is going a little too detailed and too far, but as you're not sleeping well, you're not really kind of like, especially if you're sleeping, it's a bad night's sleep, you really don't kind of get to clean things up as well.
Yeah.
When our body is craving carbohydrates, a lot of people think that's because we're craving tryptophan in the brain. And you kind of wonder, why would we do that? Well, there's this really interesting data that, as we have more inflammation peripherally in our body, that floats around and eventually triggers the immune cells in the brain. The immune cells in the brain spill out all their inflammatory factors, and they activate this enzyme, indiolamine 2,3-deoxygenase, and it pulls tryptophan. So instead of making serotonin, we pull tryptophan from serotonin or from tryptophan in that pool. And we make these kind of very defensive molecules to protect the brain that are very also inflammatory. Because again, when we want to protect the brain, we're going into a state of inflammation. And so part of how one might understand you craving the carbs is, when we eat carbs, we transport more tryptophan into the brain. And so, that you're kind of like, responding. It might not work that quickly, but it's and that's part of how I understand that. The other thing is that if you have a bad night's sleep, another reason you might be craving sugar is you want to get more tryptophan into the brain. And in part because your body's like, man, that sucked. We need to sleep better. Let's make a boatload of melatonin. I'm not sure that's exactly how it works, but I think it's really important to pay attention to these things. Because when you're craving carbs, we can just say like, oh, that's awful, they're evil. But there's also why your brain's always run on carbs, right? All vegetables are made of carbohydrates. That's the primary nutrient in them. So when we say plant-based diet, we're saying carb-based diet, basically. There's understanding kind of and getting a really good sense of signals from your body and developing a natural palate, i.e. palate that just really enjoys natural flavors. Two of the big parts of nutritional psychiatry and kind of people reestablishing a good relationship with food that, get overlooked sometimes.
Is depression, is that just a chemical imbalance in the brain and the body, or what actually is depression for those people that are wondering, helping people define the term properly?
Yeah. So, as a physician and somebody who really likes science, I think about all mood states and all conscious states as resting in biology and biochemistry. And so I do think about depression and mood states as having an underlying root in the brain. I think there's a lot of things that go on in the brain, ranging from spirituality to consciousness that, don't exactly feel biological to people, but I think are highly biological and really interesting and a part of this. I'll just say that I don't think it's just like serotonin and dopamine. I also think that notion of a chemical imbalance, now there's a way that like psychiatry, I wouldn't say is in trouble. There's a lot of like rebuttal of that. And I think that the reason that idea came into vogue or that phrase got used, in part of it was big pharma, but in part it was really trying to destigmatize these illnesses, right? That you're not a weak person because you're sad and anxious, that you're not a bad, moral character because you drink too much, that there is biology and neurochemistry to these disorders. And everyone with a human genome carries genes that potentially could get expressed to lead to a lot of these disorders. Think about depression. Your lifetime risk of depression for most people is reasonably high. I think 1 in 4 women over the age of 60 in America are taking an antidepressant. And a lot of times people quote the statistic like that's bad. And I just think like, are we ever going to stop gaslighting women? Maybe 25% of women are on antidepressants because the world is really, really awful to women. And they're treating the subsequent mood disorders and anxiety disorders. I just think that those are voluntary women who are taking a medicine, and we should be a little more curious why, as opposed to being like, oh, so overprescribed. I don't want to sound like I'm all pro medicine. I just think there's a lot of ways that, so yes, there are a lot of ways that medications get misunderstood and stigmatized. So people who need them don't get them. And oftentimes when people get them, they don't get them in a way that is maximally effective. So I think there's just a lot of frustration and misinformation out there. So,
yeah. Are you all for medications, antidepressants?
Yeah, I'm all for antidepressants. I think anybody who isn't is, I think anybody who isn't for responsible psychopharmacology has not spent a lot of time treating patients. I don't think meds are essential for most patients.
Yeah.
For a lot of patients, I think people need different medicines at different times in their lives sometimes. But I think that for certain people, they're going to die by suicide if there weren't antidepressants. And you see that happen a couple of times. Or think about if people want to question psychopharmacology, explain ketamine. I give you an IV drip. In 30 minutes, you're no longer suicidally depressed and your brain is growing. I mean, Jesus, that's like, I don't know what that is. I guess that's a breakthrough, a miracle, something to be understood, something that, I'm in awe of in terms of understanding how can we do a better job getting more people better, right? People know, I think responsibly, hey, if all these meds would work so well, why do we have a mental health crisis? Is it a crappy delivery system? Is it that they, work for some people better than others and we don't stratify that population so well? I mean, there's a lot of great questions and a lot of great critiques of how meds and medications fit into the healthcare system right now. I don't want to, again, just come across as, totally pro, but I'm in the position, I meet a lot of people in crisis and feel like, not to sound arrogant, but feel like I've helped save a lot of lives with medications over the years. And also lots of psychotherapy. I think one of the differences, I don't know, a lot of people are surprised. I'm a psychiatrist, but I do lots of psychotherapy, like I said, listening with patients, 30 plus hours a week, most weeks. So most people think about us as folks who just prescribe, and I prescribe in that context to try and, have humility. And these aren't perfect medicines. They're not silver bullets. Sometimes it's even hard to tell that they work or they don't work. They certainly have some side effects, but, there's some medicines like lithium. Who are using lithium? It's a salt. It's stardust. It's one of the primordial elements of the known universe. And, it's the only one of 2 FDA approved medications for suicide prevention. I mean, so anyway, those are, I guess, some of my broad thoughts on meds.
Does that mean there are, I guess, for different people is sort of, I guess, a broad term, different levels of depression and how it affects different people?
Jay, I think about it as more different types of depression, because I think what happens sometimes is people think like, oh, if you're on 200 milligrams, you must be really sick. Whereas if someone else is on 10 milligrams, they're like, no, they're not so sick, right?
Yeah.
And I think what that the same thing happens with food. Right? Like one of the real powerful studies in here, is it in here? Is it out? Hold on. It's in here, the Healthy Med Trial. Med Trial took people who were extremely severely depressed and gave them a Mediterranean diet. Now, they were also getting medicine and they're in a program, but they, with the brain food, the Mediterranean diet, went from severely depressed to mildly depressed. And if you've ever been severely depressed, going to mildly depressed is great. You're sleeping through the night. You don't want to, you're not having suicidal thoughts. You're not crying as much. So the same thing with meds, right? Some people need like 25 milligrams of Zoloft, really low dose, and they do amazing. Other people, they need a higher dose. And I don't like thinking of those patients who need more as quote unquote, like sicker, having like a worse depression. Also, a lot of people with depression have about a third have really high levels of inflammation. So, there's this way that depression, if you come to me and you have a depression due to inflammation, one, antidepressants are anti-inflammatories, many of them. But 2, one of the reasons the medicines often don't work is that people are living a lifestyle that's very pro-depressive. So if you're drinking any alcohol and you're on an antidepressant, the antidepressant is not going to work as well, period. I mean, there's a lot of data that just might not work. If you're on an antidepressant and you're not sleeping, no, sometimes they interfere with that. I appreciate that. But, if you're eating lots and lots of sugar and junk food, which, is really tempting when you're anxious and depressed, all these things can interfere with medication's efficacy. So that's where in some ways I think they get a bad rap.
My dad says sometimes, it's kind of like a joke. He'll get a tub of ice cream and he'll have, or a bunch of chocolate, and he'll smash quite a bit of it. Now, he's quite a fit and healthy dude. And then we'll say, why did you have so much? And he go, I'm depressed. I'll just, as sort of like a joke. But I guess my question to you is, how does food contribute to our mental health as a whole, and how can we beat depression and anxiety? These are 2 big questions, I know, with the kind of foods that we do eat.
The way that you beat depression with food, or help beat depression with food, or contribute, is you prime your brain for growth and you eliminate sources of inflammation, many of which can come from diet. I don't just mean gluten. I just mean, eating in a way that doesn't really use the most recent science about the gut, about the microbiome, and nothing, I think, too surprising for anyone in this space, right? If you eat more fermented foods and plants, the data suggests you're going to have a healthier microbiome, meaning the type of bacteria that live in your gut. The book, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, has a 6-week plan that kind of as a nutritional psychiatrist, I think in food categories. So if I take a new nutritional history of Jay and I don't see any leafy greens, he's not, making kale chips. He doesn't have a sunflower sprout salad every now and then. He's not dropping kale and basil in his pesto. I'm just going to kind of note that and think, well, this is a great opportunity for Jay. Leafy greens are filled with fiber. They're filled with what's called nutrient density, more nutrients per calories than other foods. And I'm going to look for other things like seafood. So I'm going to look at these kind of food categories, trying to get a set of nutrients. Your question, like, how does depression relate to food? So if there's certain nutrients you don't eat enough of, you will get depressed. So like if anyone listening lives in the UK and you know any men who are vegan, according to the EPIC Oxford study, about 52% of male vegans have B12 deficiency. And B12 deficiency just causes depression, death of brain cells, and dementia eventually. Easy to fix. Just make sure all of our vegans take a little B12 supplement. Got nothing against vegans, but just as a notion that changing our food, especially eliminating food categories that, are the only food categories that have B12, it can be very dangerous if you don't supplement. So other ways that food relate to mental health, if we think about part of what I try and do with people is helping their brain get into more of a growth mode. I call this neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain can grow and repair itself. Lots of things. There are these neural factors. I've got all these illustrations in the book, Jay. I want to show one of them off. Here's the one for the microbiome, because I feel like these phrases, I don't know, we all use them, and just, I like to have something I can flip back and make sure I'm, thinking about the concept. And so neuroplasticity, again, brain growth and repair. BDNF is, I was looking, there's a BDNF diagram in here. It's a big molecule that, it's not that big of a molecule, but there's a molecule that influences brain growth and repair. It's called a neurotrophin. And so food, exercise, psychotherapy, antidepressant medications, they all promote BDNF expression. And some of those nutrients promote BDNF expression, we just don't get a lot of. 48% of Americans don't get enough zinc. Zinc is one of those things that triggers BDNF. Most Americans, and I think a lot of us, don't get any, very little seafood, very little, more than we used to. But in America, the average American gets 14 pounds of seafood a year, right? So that's just not a lot. So if we think about other ways that food and depression or food and anxiety relate, say the notion of the microbiome, and just, again, what gets in the way of neuroplasticity. One thing is inflammation. What's the master regulator of inflammation? It's our immune system, which is really centered in the gut. And so working on eating more fiber, so 68, I think it was only 5% of Americans meet the recommended daily allowance for fiber. And you could argue fiber is one of the most important nutrients for mental health. Like we all say, like, oh, omega-3 fats, B12, like protein. It's like, yeah, that's all really important. But fiber, is critical, because fiber and eating more plants, more fermented food, at least in the research now, leads to a microbiome that's more diverse, that's less inflammatory. It's actually some data showing out of Stanford, if you eat a lot of fermented foods, like 5 or 6 servings a day, you actually improve immune function in a reasonably short amount of time. Your own immune system works better. So, those are some of the ways that it would kind of tie in nutrition, a little bit about neuroplasticity and the immune system in the gut with our brain health and our mental health. Then there's also just a lot of data, Jay, about what's called dietary pattern. Yep. So if you look at a population that eats a more traditional diet, it could be a Mediterranean style diet, Norwegian diet, Japanese diet. Sometimes the researchers just call it a traditional diet, and they kind of, define that as the dietary pattern in the research, according to, lots of plants and not a lot of processed foods. These Mediterranean style traditional diets are protective, it looks like, for depression. So there's a study of 10,000 university students in Spain, and those who were in the top half in terms of how well they ate the Mediterranean diet of their class, they had between a 30 to 50% decreased risk of depression over the next 4.5 years. So, that's just one study, but it's a very, interesting prospective epidemiological study. And so I think that, having a dietary pattern based on real foods, not processed foods, not maybe, headline news to anyone that that's good for your health, but a lot of people haven't really connected that to their mental health, that if you're feeling anxious and depressed, maybe there's lots of reasons for that. Maybe you need to process and talk about trauma that you've had. Maybe you have a biological depression. Maybe you have a nutritional deficiency, right? But one thing that you can begin to do for sure to kind of eliminate some of that is to eat a very simple diet made of whole food, diverse set of whole foods. And in these food categories, we talk about nutritional psychiatry, and you need to be depression and anxiety. So seafood, greens, nuts, beans, and seeds, I would say. Rainbow vegetables, right? Look at your plate. You see lots of greens and lots of colors. And then fermented foods, which the big ones I recommend tend to be kefir and kombucha are the two that I find people kind of tolerate the best.
Big fan of seafood. And here in Sydney, Australia, we have a lot of it, which I'm grateful for. I mean, just down the road from my house, we've got they're called Costies, which means lots of seafood. So we get a lot of that. But yeah, I think climate and culture as well, that I think that also plays an impact in terms of what people eat, when they eat. Are you a fan of intermittent fasting at all?
Yes. I'm a fan of most of these in the sense of I find it interesting. I find both fasting and fasting states and ketogenic diets interesting. It's interesting to run your brain cells on a different set of fuels.
Yep.
I think the psychological responses to hunger and fasting that we all have, I personally find that really interesting. Not that I ever want to starve myself, but when I feel ravenously hungry and I'm just like so hungry, I'm going to pass out. And I don't know, it's like you store enough calories in your body for like 30 days. So what is that? And how can I settle that down or sit with it? Or how can I not gobble down a bunch of, sandwiches and instead like have a cup of tea and eat a healthy lunch? So, intermittent fasting, I think it's also helpful for people in terms of breaking a cycle if you're trying to lose weight, which a lot of people are, of eating a low carb dinner, getting to bed early so you skip the carb craving, skipping dessert all of the time. I think that, and then waking up in the morning and not having carbohydrate, you end up in this kind of, potentially like 16 hours or so without a big insulin signal, without a lot of blood. And again, that can be uncomfortable for folks. I think depending if you have medical conditions or you have a fragile medical state in some way, you want to, be mindful of all that, maybe work with someone, a dietitian, nutritionist. But all that said, I find that to be an eating pattern a lot of people can adopt. Also, when people are struggling with I won't call it discipline, but just like food's delicious, there's a lot of it, it's hard not to eat it. The eating window where people, between noon and 6, you can eat whatever the heck you want, as much as you want, but from 6 o'clock until noon, 6 p.m. until noon, you're not going to eat, or do that a few days a week. Again, I think people need to be cautious about how irritable and hungry that makes them. But I think a lot of these can help. I think sometimes people get overwhelmed. There's too many options. That's where I like to really focus on nutritional psychiatry, because I think you can focus on intermittent fasting, but all of this should be put under the umbrella, put in the tent, I would say, of brain health and nutritional psychiatry. Because, I'm biased, but I just think your brain's the best part of you. And that's what you should focus on nourishing, and everything else will take care of itself.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about, because there's so much information out there, it can, I guess, make a lot of people anxious in knowing, hey, which one is actually the right one for me and what works for my body? How do I know that? So I guess in terms of a psychiatry aspect in helping someone who is really, really anxious in choosing the right kinds of foods or the right diet that is for them, how would you go about helping them first?
Mm-hmm. Well, in our clinic, the Brain Food Clinic, we have our clinicians, we do mental health intakes, but we add a food intake of just, in broad brushstrokes, trying to understand how people relate to food, how they nourish themselves, what food categories are really strong in, so we can help reinforce that, and where they need a little bit of help. So when someone comes to us and they're feeling really anxious, and, I'm looking for things that aren't going to overwhelm them. Things like, if you're anxious, one of the problems is you just don't have a lot of an appetite, or you're nauseous sometimes. So how can we think about things like a smoothie that's really nutrient dense and have lots of nuts and seeds in it, or maybe some greens in there? Or, how can we think about adding in some fermented foods? How can we get, more protein in there? Because a lot of protein and fats are more satiating than carbs. Are there kind of stimulants, right? Are people drinking 3 or 4 cups of coffee? Or I gave a lecture at a prominent hospital once, and sometimes I'll interview like a person just to kind of show how I think about food by talking with somebody. I interviewed a physician who's her basic diet was 3 lattes a day. 3 skim lattes a day. And she was really anxious, harried, hungry, where you just, getting some snacks in her pockets. She was a physician as she kind of rounds the hospital, really emphasizing to her kind of division, hey, something's not working. Your clinicians aren't eating. It's not healthy. They work too hard. Something in your messaging is wrong, because your people who are promoting health are not taking care of themselves. So trying to spot those kind of sources of caffeine. So, we recommend a lot of dark chocolate, but sometimes dark chocolate and other stimulants, people can be very sensitive to these. Thinking if there are times of day, I'm not certainly some people have food sensitivities. It's not super common, but that can lead to anxiety. So, but I try and look at, especially initially, what are the next few things that you could add in that you like, that would help, that you know about? Are there a couple little things we could recommend that seem obvious and helpful potentially? And then can we keep with it? Of making sure we're being responsible. Somebody's severely depressed, having anxiety attacks. They've tried a lot of things. They want to start medicine. But, I certainly see that, not a lot, but where people want to try medication, but they want in the context of a more kind of integrative treatment, and with the notion that the other things are going to get cleaned up. So the medicine isn't the only option we have. So those are some of my thoughts on initial anxiety presentations and treatments.
Is there any food that, let me ask you this question instead, and I might ask you this question a little bit towards the end, because I know our time is coming to a close, but 50 Shades of Kale, can you explain that for us?
Barely. I can try. I can just tell the story of it. Maybe if anybody listening wants to explain it to me. It was a strange time in my life. I got a little manic with the kale. I love kale. When I lived in Kenya for a few months, when I was a medical student, we ate a dish called sukuma wiki, and I was a vegetarian back then. So I was eating a lot of good sauteed greens so I was eating a lot of that, but back when this all, 50 Shades of 50 Shades of Grey came out, right? This movie about kind of rough sex and sexual fantasy. And thinking, at that time I was like a young doctor, the happiness diet had come out, and I was kind of feeling like, man, if this many people got obsessed for eating for their mental health and brain health, the world would be such a great place. But instead they're getting obsessed with this sexy book. I was probably a little jealous, Jay. And then I was down at my farmer's market. I was living in the West Village of Manhattan, and there's this great farmer's market in Abington Square. And there's this farmer that had these 5 or 6 different varietals of kale. So I just got this 50 Shades of Kale stuck in. Kale salads were starting to pop all over the city. It was 2011. And I just couldn't get out of my head, Jay, 50 Shades of Kale. And I thought, well, there are 5 or 6. They're called cultivars of kale. They're different varieties. How many are there? I started going on the internet, and I found there were 20 and 30. And I thought, are there 50? And then I grew 50 different kale types on my farm in Indiana. And then I don't know, then kale taught me about nutrient density, which I really appreciated. Kale became a muse to me. I just began to think how many different ways, anything you put, you make kale in eggs, it's healthier. You put kale in your cocktail, it's healthier. I started writing, I wrote the original 50 Shades of Kale was an ebook. I wrote this kale erotica, like a love, kind of love sex. I don't know. It's like, they didn't put that in the hardcover, thank God. Then we launched National Kale Day. I partnered actually with the department. We partnered with the Department of Defense in America. At one point, we fed kale to all of the U.S. servicemen and women in U.S. commissaries. We partnered with the County of Los Angeles. Every public school in Los Angeles one year for National Kale Day served kale. I don't know what happened. I got teased at the American Psychiatric Association. They called me Dr. Kale. They laughed at me. It was very embarrassing. But, in the midst of all that, we had a lot of fun. We threw a lot of kale parties. And I'm very grateful for that. I was grateful both for the creative inspiration. I was grateful for learning about the importance of diversity. If you don't like kale, I'm still going to feed your brain. If you don't ever want to eat kale, it's okay with me. I'm going to try you on sunflower sprouts or mesclun or basil or arugula or, rosemary. I mean, I'm going to keep working until bok choy, right? There's a lot of different leafy greens. You can hate kale and we can still feed your brain. And so I'm really grateful for kale for, all the great kale salads I had and the great kale chips that, by the way, if you don't make kale chips at home, I'd recommend to get the green curly kale, the little frills, little olive oil, sprinkle some salt in there, kind of massage just a little bit, spread them out on your cooking tray, 325 degrees, 300 to 325 for 7 minutes. Give it a little tug because it's in a little puddle of oil, maybe not too much oil, hopefully, but a little bit, or maybe flip them. Let them roast a couple more minutes in the oven, pull them out. They're very crispy. Kids love them. You can put actually any sort of seasoning on there. But that was my kale love affair 10 years ago. This is the 10th year for National Kale Day. It's the first Wednesday in October for anybody who wants to celebrate. It's very easy to celebrate. All you have to do is eat kale. You get bonus points if you share or feed other people kale. That's big, and that helps you get into kale heaven. So, and since we're talking about kale, I don't have it right here, but also there's misinformation on the internet, Nate, Jay, since you bring up kale. I just want to point out, for some reason, I'm seeing all this garbage that kale has oxalates. And oxalates are natural compounds in plants where they hang on minerals, and oxalates get turned into kidney stones. Kale is a low oxalate food. It's actually when dietitians prescribe low oxalate diets, they prescribe kale. So I just want to, and also there's some crap on the internet that kale's full of thallium. That is also not true. Kale, if you grow kale in polluted soil, kale is so good at pulling nutrients, it also pulls toxins. So if you're growing your kale in toxins, it will accumulate in all of the vegetables, including kale. That's why I recommend you get your kale from organic farms or small farms, ideally, or farms locally that grow their stuff in good, healthy soil.
Thank you so much for sharing all that and explaining it. Because yes, I have seen all the negative information on
kale backlash. Oh, it's so painful. Literally, news broke. I got an interview are you Dr. Ramsey? It's yeah. Are you involved in National Kale Day? It's yeah, of course. I'm why? They're are you aware of the thallium in kale? And this was literally the day before we were about to serve thousands of kids, or they were about to serve thousands of kids kale in Los Angeles. And I'm thinking all these Los Angeles moms are going to be going just so angry we fed their kids poisonous food, right? It's horrible. And it was both bad science, but also just one of these examples of, I don't know, I guess I kind of consider it the forces of evil that seek to confuse people, often sell them things and make them scared. And if there's one thing I want people to know about this book, it is really written with an idea of helping you have joyfulness around your relationship with food, not to have guilt or fear or cheat days, but to have a set of foods that are delicious, that you love, that Mother Nature grows for you, and that have always historically throughout our history as a human species fed our brains. And now we're eating a diet that really deteriorates our brain and negatively impacts our mental health. And, I hope everyone hears, and I think Jay, you've done a great job illustrating this. I believe in a lot of things helping our mental health: exercise, psychotherapy, medications, different supplements sometimes, but food is something every brain needs to get right. And so I hope our conversation today helps you get a little bit right. maybe some of these foods, we don't talk too much about them, but things like small fish and anchovies. I've got a set of power player foods, cashews and pumpkin seeds and leafy greens like we talked about. And I just hope it inspires you to eat more of those this week and just do something every day to take care of your mental health. And sometimes it takes a lot more than that. But over time, all those little actions, whether it's exercising or calling a friend or taking care of someone or just sitting with your pet and petting them, those are all things that help you with your mental health. And I hope you'll all engage with those things more this week.
It's more of a holistic approach to life. And I have what they call the freedom diet. It consists of all these things that you are talking about, but it's free for me. So if it's free for you, then fantastic, go and do it. But the likelihood of people, with this information craziness going on, eating kale, for goodness sake, I mean, it's a health food. It is a superfood. I know it is. And kids or parents are probably feeding their kids 10 times worse foods than kale. So come on.
There's not outrage about breakfast cereal, but there's outrage. No. I have kids that don't love kale that much, but I make an amazing kale mac and cheese that has a ton of kale in it, and I don't hide it. It's green. They gobble it up. They devour kale chips, but it's not like that's all I feed them, right? It's in there occasionally to help them develop their palate.
Your love for kale kind of sounds like my love for spinach and broccoli. Or broccoli, however you want to say it.
I've got an equal. I probably eat more broccoli than I do kale now, but don't tell the kale mafia. They'll come.
It's our secret. We won't say anything.
Let me free, but they told me. Just remember, don't talk bad about kale. Jay, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you and everybody.
Likewise, my friend. I know I've gone over time, but I have to bring you back on at a later date. Can I ask you one final question? Is that all right?
For sure.
This is my all-time favorite question. I have to finish it off with our conversation. It is a hypothetical one, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Then ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of argument, but they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
Oh, boy, that's a great question, Jay. I mean, I guess the things that I would want people on my 100th birthday to see in my life, or the highlights I'd want them to remember, I think revolve around a couple of things pop into my head. One is moments where I've helped advance a conversation about male mental health and helped live by some ideals of modern masculinity, of trying to emphasize the importance of developing our emotional intelligence and really doing everything we can to construct a world that's safe for our wives and sisters and daughters, because it's not now. So I think anything that I've done that would help in that, I'd be really honored to show that. I think moments where I've been creative and responsible with my creativity, where my creativity has really flowed out of me in a way that, the times have been a little crazy for me, like with kale. Like if you look at 50 Shades of Kale, I food styled with Jenny Easterlow, the chef I co-authored with, most of those dishes myself, and bound up all that kale. And it was just wonderful, kind of expansive, creative moment. I think there are other times where I've harnessed my creativity, I would say with this book, and kind of harnessed a group of creatives to bring a better message. So I'd like the best of those moments to come out. And then I think, moments where I'm the best of myself as a dad. I think those are ones of, now as I'm in my 40s and I kind of think about, as you said, success. It's just that feels like something that maybe doesn't get talked enough about. It's framed as a midlife crisis, right? When you're a man or a woman and you're balancing career and you're balancing your relationship and you're balancing, and I've come to loathe that idea, because it's a midlife challenge and it's a wonderful challenge, right? It's a blessing to have these challenges of how do you instill values in a young human being? How do you continue to hone your craft? How do you deepen a relationship? And those are the best challenges out there in human existence. So, I guess to get back to this birthday party, I would want Yeah, I wish I were being a little bit more like deep. Like maybe I'd want to show my biggest failures and say, folks, I'm checking out at 100. I want you to see all the ways I failed in life. And so you can learn from that. And this patient said to me the other day, he's like, oh, basically like, I don't want there to be pain in my life. I don't want it to be hard. And it was weird because this is a kid who like works harder than anybody I know. Right? And I said to him, it was, I'm usually better than this. It just popped out. I said, you don't want to grow? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, I don't know. Growing always hurts, doesn't it? Like if you're really growing, like not, great, I'm hitting the bullseye, but really like, wow, I can't imagine hitting that bullseye and then working hard until you hit it. And so, I don't know, I guess, yeah, if I were a bigger, better person, maybe I would want people to see that. Maybe I'd want to show people when I was at my worst of my mental health. This birthday party is getting a little down. We're going to come out after. There's going to be like a wake part where we have a great time, but drink a lot of kombucha and eat a lot of dark chocolate. But like, yeah, in terms of if it was going to be a great film and we had all of the moments of my life, I'd definitely show some triumphs for sure so my kids could see it. I broke the pole vaulting record in my college for sure. That would be like the beginning, like the highlight reel. But then I think like maybe halfway through it would go dark and it would like show a lot of tears. It would show like the worst, like hardest moments somehow. Not like for pity and martyrdom, but more of like coming out of that and maybe what I learned or maybe, just letting people know that's been a part of it too. And then it would end on a high note. It'd end on good stuff like the dad stuff, the like walks in the mountains. It would have trips. I think that would certainly, when I think about like when I play the movie of my life, I was really blessed early in life to get to do a lot of traveling and got exposed to a lot of different cultures. And I come from very rural white America that really kind of in some ways struggles with appreciating other values. And so certainly I'd want some of those highlights played on my 100-year birthday, Jay. If I'd love to see it again. I remember standing on this roof with one of my buddies, Ian, as the sun was setting, Kisumu, the sun was setting over Lake Victoria, or, just some really wonderful times that I can replay in my head, but it'd be fun for everybody just to be there with me on my 100th birthday. And that would be it. Then I think I'd wander off, man. I'd high five everybody. I'd give a lot of hugs and kisses. I'd take like the last kombucha and I'd just like walk off into the stars. That'd be a good act. I'd like that. It'd be like exactly 100. Like, I like that, Jay. Thanks. I feel better about it. I was talking to my analyst about my sort of struggling with existential questions of mortality and our meaning. I like this imagining the 100th birthday like this, like life well lived. Here are the highlights, fist bumps and hugs. Peace out. I like that. Thanks, Jay.
Oh, you're welcome. That's kind of the point of the question. I think it's, whatever you want it to show. And it kind of,
and my horse Cinco, I'd show my horse Cinco and I going over a couple epic jumps. I'm not sure he'll be my horse for long, but he is right now. And he's been a big part of me getting my mental health back over the last couple of years. So I definitely want to show him. Sorry.
No, of course. You can have whatever you want or whoever.
I know you said that. I like it. You didn't have to narrow it. Usually people narrow it down like one thing. It's like,
whatever you want, man. I don't like restricting people. Like, no way. That's dumb. But I think it's a perfect send-off message for people to think about, to reflect on in their own life, what it is for them. But Dr. Ramsey, man, it's been an absolute joy and a pleasure communicating with you today. I can't wait to have you back on to continue this conversation because we didn't touch the surface, really.
We didn't any data. We talked a little about the book. Everybody, I'm on Instagram as Drew Ramsey MD. That's probably, and I do have a fun newsletter. It comes out every Friday called Friday Feels, just sort of cool links to stuff that we're checking out about mental health. And then we've got a big course coming out called Healing the Modern Brain that's dropping any day now. So take a peek on it's drewramseymd.com. And Jay, thanks so much. It's great for a fun conversation. Thanks for telling everybody about Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And I will look forward to talking to you sometime in the future.
You're welcome.
Enjoy some seafood tonight, all right?
Oh, I will. 100% I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramsey. You're a legend.